Hey guys, welcome back to Afternoon Read. I'm Miss Linda, and today we are reading Chapter 4 of Part 1 of Dark Lord by Jamie Thomson. And just a reminder, we are reading this with permission of Scholastic. So let's get started with Chapter 4. The door opened, and Miss Cloy swept in. "Come along now, Dirk, off we go." He brittled at her rude, commanding tone. With some difficulty, he was able to swallow his pride and followed her out of the room and down the brightly lit hospital corridor. He looked up at the back of Miss Cloy's head as she walked in front of him and began to make the movements and gestures required for the casting of various spells, like the charm of sudden baldness, the cantrip of uncontrollable flatulence, and the hex of hideous hives. Miss Cloy gave him a look over her shoulder. "Stop that nonsense, Dirk, you look ridiculous. And hurry up, we haven't got all day." This just made him even more annoyed, so he moved up to the spell of utter annihilation, the hex of red egg, and even the summoning of the ravenous ones of Golgor, who, if the spell had worked, would have eaten every living thing in a 100-mile radius. Shortly, he grew bored of such games and began to take notice of the hospital around him. He marveled at the size of it, and at the utter stupidity of these humans. Why waste so much wealth and resources on curing the sick or healing wounds? Much easier to simply consign those who are unable to work into the rendering vats, where their bodies can be turned into something useful, like candles, sausage meat, or fertilizer. And if there's a manpower problem, well, simply create more goblins in the warrens or more orcs in the breeding silos. Then again, you just can't breed humans when you like because of their ludicrously inefficient reproductive processes, okay? Dirk decided that perhaps the humans had a point. Hospitals might be useful after all. Miss Cloy led him to her mechanical chariot in the hospital parking lot. Her car was blue. She called it a beetle. Though its surface was curved and armored in a way similar to that of an iridescent beetle, the similarities ended there. Where were the horned antlers, the clawed mandibles, the jointed legs, and so on? Dirk supposed that it could be useful in war, but it didn't hold a candle to the giant battle beetles he was used to back home. Still, it looked like an interesting machine. As they approached, the beetle beeped and flashed a greeting at them. "Aha!" thought Dirk. Perhaps there was an element of magic to these machines after all. Somehow it had recognized its mistress. Was it inhabited by a spirit of some kind? Or was there a minor demon bound into it? Fascinating. Miss Cloy opened a door for him, and he stepped in, acknowledging the correctness and deference she had shown with a curt nod. She got into the car on the other side. The interior was a source of amazement to Dirk. There were buttons, levers, and lights and things, and it all looked so clean and pure, put together with a standard of craftsmanship he'd never seen before. Though on closer inspection, he realized most of the paneling and some of the knobs and levers could be torn off without too much effort. "Stop that, you little vandal," said Miss Cloy angrily. Now sit quietly and put your seatbelt on." Seatbelt? Dirk fiddled around with the belt by his side, but then Miss Cloy gave a tut of irritation, leaned over, and buckled him in. Ah, thought Dirk. It was some kind of restraint device. Ha! So she feared him so much she felt the need to restrain him. Excellent. But as he settled into his seat, Dirk realized the belt wasn't really very restraining, and he could unbuckle it himself at any time. Odd. So he unbuckled it, and then buckled it. Unbuckle. Buckle. He did this several times until Miss Cloy snapped. We can't go anywhere unless you're safely buckled up, you little monster. Just put the seatbelt on and leave it on. Dirk glared at her. If only she knew what a monster he really was. If he ever got his powers back, then one day he'd be able to show her. Great would be the slaughter on that day. With that thought, Hold on. Sorry, lost my place. With that thought, a broad smile spread across his face. Miss Cloy seemed to recoil in horror at the sight of it. Hurriedly, she looked away. Miss Cloy did something with a key in her hand, and the beetle burst into life with a low roar, shuddering and shaking ominously. Dirk was seized by a moment of fear and grabbed onto whatever he could get a hold of. Miss Cloy gasped in pain, and Dirk realized he'd grabbed the soft flesh of her upper arm. Even though he hadn't meant to do it, his first thought was, "Ha! Suffer and die, puny human. Fear the power of the Dirk." Then Miss Cloy did something strange. Rather than admonish him for hurting her, or blow his head off with a spell or stab him through the heart as he would have, she held his hand gently and said, "Well, there, Dirk, it's all right. I didn't know you'd never been in a car before. It's all right to be scared, but it's perfectly safe. I've done this 1,000 times. There's nothing to fear." Dirk stared at her in surprise. All right to be scared? What did she mean? Was this some kind of trick to lull him into a false sense of security by seeming to care about him? By the 9 netherworlds, what was going on? The car lurched forward, and Dirk gave an involuntary gasp. Excuse me. Miss Cloy seemed to push some kind of pedal with her foot, and the car stopped. "Would you rather we walked, Dirk? It's a little far from here, but we could do that," she said kindly. Dirk pulled himself together. He was determined to put a brave face on things, to stop being a wimpy kid, and to be the Dark Lord he really was. So he said, imperiously, "Not at all, Miss Cloy. Proceed immediately, and crush all those who get in our way." Miss Cloy acknowledged his words with a nod, and then muttered something under her breath, which he only just caught. "Believe me, Dirk, I've often wanted to." The car moved off. Dirk managed to get himself under control, even when they got up to the terrifying speed of what Cloy called 30. Of course, he traveled faster than that, on the backs of dragons and such, but never with 1,000 other dragons rushing around him at the same time. Everywhere there were other cars, and it seemed to Dirk like each one of them really was trying to crush all the other ones that got in its way. It was some kind of monumentally insane free-for-all, like orcs at a barbecue. After a while, the beetle rolled on its rubbery round feet into the driveway of one of the human inhabitations that lined so many of their streets. It looked much like all the other human dwellings they had passed. Miss Cloy did something, and the car juddered to a halt. Its lights faded, and all sounds ceased. This was what Dirk thought of as the beetle's dormant state, during which it presumably dreamed its linear insectoid dreams. Miss Cloy got out of the car and motioned Dirk to stay where he was for now. Dirk flickered an irritated glance at her. More orders. His thoughts were interrupted by a sickeningly cheerful bell sound. Miss Cloy had pushed a button on the side of the house. A few seconds later, the door opened, and a tall, thin woman with blonde hair stepped out. She wore a black top with a white collar. Her clothes reminded him of the uniform of the assassin monks of Sindalos, who operated from their mountain citadel high in the Great Skybar range, until he used the power of the meteorite to level their entire mountain and all the assassins along with it, that is. He watched as Miss Cloy and the woman talked. After a few moments, Miss Chloe called him over. "This is Mrs. Purejoy. She's your guardian now," she said. Mrs. Purejoy leaned down and said in a kindly voice, "Hello, Dirk. Welcome to our house. You can call me Hilary." Her voice made Dirk think of muffins, birdsong, and little country cottages. There was nothing Dirk liked more than to see these muffins snatched out of the hands of little children and devoured by greedy goblins, birds shot out of the sky by orc war machines, and little cottages torn to the ground by hordes of ravening vampires. They took Dirk inside. Chloe and Purejoy were signing various documents and papers. These humans were so obsessed with bureaucracy that Dirk wondered how they got anything done at all. Same. Purejoy told him to look around, but not touch anything, especially in the kitchen. The house seemed odd to Dirk. The pictures on the walls weren't of grand conquests or defeated foes begging for mercy or scenes of apocalyptic destruction to take pride in, but rather images of nature, or a human face, or flowers and the like. What was the point of that? You could just see flowers at any old time. And in any case, the point of flowers was that they could be ripped up and ruined, and human faces were all over the place. More's the pity. The seats were certainly comfortable, though. There was one large leather chair that was particularly good. He resolved to note down the design and have one built for him on his return home, but instead of leather, he'd use halfling skin. The lanterns were interesting, too. He couldn't work out how the light came through them. He tried a simple finger-flame cantrip, but no fire appeared at the end of his finger. But that was to be expected. None of his magic had worked so far. Eventually, he found a little button and pressed it. The lamp came on. Ooh. It gave off a strange, bright light from inside, a curious glass ball. Artificial sunlight, he supposed. Probably powered by the stuff the humans called electricity. He pressed the button again. The light went off. Marvelous! He pushed again. It came on. And again. Then again. Again. Fascinating. And again. And so on. "Oh, do stop that, Dirk," said Miss Chloe suddenly. He turned around, startled. "Oh, yes, please, Dirk, don't," said Miss Purejoy. "You might break it, dear, if you keep doing that. They're very delicate, you know." Dirk really hated being told what to do, especially in such a patronizing manner. But there wasn't much he could do about it. Well, not much right now, that is. So he just smiled at them. Both of them looked surprised, afraid even, and then took a step back, almost in unison. They looked at each other. "See?" said Miss Chloe. Miss Purejoy looked subdued for a moment. Then she brightened up and said, "Well, we'll see what some love and kindness can do. Eh, Jane?" Miss Chloe smiled wanly at that, extended her hand, and said in a muted tone, "Good luck, Hilary." Miss Purejoy shook her hand and replied, "Oh, thanks, Jane. I'll call you tomorrow. We'll be in touch to let you know how it goes." Miss Chloe turned to Dirk and said, "You'll be living here from now on, probably. But over the next few weeks and months, you'll also be seeing quite a bit of Dr. Wings and Professor Randall, and I'll be visiting every now and then. Okay?" Dirk grimaced. "Not those two idiots again," he said. "If I had my way, I'd give them both a session on the racks of pain in my dungeons of doom. Clear their befuddled brains." Miss Chloe raised her eyes and sighed. "Goodbye, Dirk, and try to be a good boy," she said somewhat unconvincingly. Then she left, leaving Dirk alone with the sickeningly nice Purejoy. Purejoy showed him around the house. It was a technical marvel. Running water, power at the flick of a switch, warmth and comfort at will, but nothing he couldn't reproduce with a spell or bound demon. Still, it was impressive, given they weren't using magic. Then she showed him his room, or cell, as Dirk preferred to call it. Purejoy seemed kindly, but he couldn't forget that she was just a guardian, whose job it was to keep him imprisoned here so he couldn't conquer the world. Her name was also significant. Purejoy. She must be a servant or follower of Hasdrubal the Pure. That much was obvious. The names were too similar. It sounded just like the sort of thing Hasdrubal would set up, in fact. The Guardians of Purity, or such like, dedicated to keeping the Dark One imprisoned for all time, blah 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 blah. The feeling was reinforced by the color of the walls. In his room, they were white. It was probably deliberate, as a kind of punishment. And Purejoy called the curtains coral cream. A strange way of describing such an insipid, nothing color. After she'd shown him around his pitiful little room, how he longed for his great hall of gloom and his throne of skulls, she left him for a while to settle in, as she called it. Immediately, he began to play with the light switch, on and off, on and off. But after a while, he got bored with that and looked around. He was pleased to find his cloak of endless night in the wardrobe as well as a selection of other clothes, most typical human rubbish. Only one thing. They called it a t-shirt, was the right color for him. That was black, of course. Same. Perhaps he'd be, well, I say same, and I'm wearing a pink t-shirt. Back to the book. Perhaps he'd be allowed to redecorate his cell eventually. Yes, black, with blood-red trim, and some bone art, mounted on the walls here and there. Slowly, Dirk began to doze off, musing on the color of black and how much he loved it. He was running for his life. Round him stretched a white expanse of snow, reaching in all directions under a cloud-cold, all-white sky. Behind him, something was closing in on him. Something terrible. Something restless. Something implacable. Something that would not stop until it had eaten his dark heart. He could hear its powerful, rhythmic footfalls in the snow. Desperately, he looked behind him. But in the almost total whiteout of this dirty, white plain, he could see only a vague shape, bulleting towards him. But in that vague outline glowed two bright yellow eyes, fixed on him with a terrible purpose. The white furred thing leaped, talon claws reaching for him, eyes blazing with feral bloodlust. Dirk sat up with a start, a scream of awful fear on his lips, but he stopped himself in time, and no sound came. He was a Dark Lord, after all, and he had his self-respect to think of. He can't be screaming out in terror at the slightest. There was a creak. His bedroom door was being closed. He snapped his head around to take a look. Caught in the light outside of his room was a pair of blue eyes, framed by blonde hair, disappearing into the lighted hallway. The door shut with a quiet click, and tiptoed footfalls receded down the corridor. It seemed some human boy had been spying on him. Probably the Purejoy's son, no doubt jealous and resentful of Dirk's coming, and checking out the competition. And who could blame him? His days of independence were numbered, for the great Dirk had come, and all would be on bended knee before him. Involuntarily, Dirk's little hand clenched into a victorious fist as he thought this. Arrgh. And maybe that's what his dream had been about, he thought to himself. Perhaps he'd sensed the boy spying on him and replaced in his mind the blue with the yellow, the blonde with the white. Hurriedly, Dirk checked his room and his bed for signs of interference. Poisoned thorns in his shoes, a crossbow bolt trap in his closet, perhaps something like the curse of the rooms of death. Though that was probably too sophisticated for the human boy. Still, a deadly scorpion under his bedclothes, a giant constrictor snake, that kind of thing was certainly possible. But he found nothing. For a while he lay on his bed, staring at the white ceiling, so much like the dirty white sky in his dream. He mused and plotted for a while before drifting off to sleep once more. This time, dreamlessly. Alright guys, that was chapter 4 of part 1 of Dark Lord by Jamie Thomson. I'll see you next week where we will continue with chapter 5. See ya!